Topic here is United States entering World War I. This is after European causes for World War I are addressed. Here we go. So if you're looking at some of the European causes, you should be able to complete this fill in the blank. Blank was assassinated, which is a reference to Ferdinand, the assassination. And then you kind of work through these particular items here, primarily using the documents that we looked at in class. Today we're primarily focused about the United States entering World War I, and here we see the dates of the conflict beginning and when the U.S. enters. Notice the war starts in 1914. The U.S. doesn't come into 1917. When World War I started, Wilson issued this declaration that claimed the United States was being neutral, and he argued that because we have people from many nations that in the United States that are from the nations now at war, that's problematic. It's going to lead to internal conflict. And this is the key for today, that Wilson is looking at transaction. When nations are fighting war, for some people, war can lead to profit. And so Wilson is saying here in his Declaration of Neutrality that we must put a curb upon our sentiments and as well as upon every transaction. So pretty much what Wilson is saying here is we need to be neutral with regard to our trade, and we cannot pick one side because that could be construed as a preference of one party to the struggle before another. So a couple things we want to take note of in this European conflict. We know that there is a trench that is on the German-French border, which is primarily the reason why Germany went through Belgium by issuing the ultimatum to Belgium when they believed that France was about to attack Germany. We looked at that document in class. We also completed the trench simulation that looked at the issue of no man's land, which is primarily in the middle of the trench. So in this particular image, we see the mortars. These are the mortars that could be dropped in the trench to potentially kill your enemy. We know that gas is being used, and there's not much movement. For you to come out of this trench and pop your head up above the ground, you run the risk of getting shot, which is going to lead to a stalemate, or all of these people pretty much hiding in the hole. And you see how fortified that this trench line is. This soldier puts his head up, he runs the risk of getting shot. So the conditions here are just not that great, and probably one of the other reasons why Wilson declared neutrality. I mean, if Ferdinand is assassinated, what impact does that really have on the United States? Here we see some other images, and I picked these because it kind of goes to the point of the stalemate or the tie, that there really is no ground that is being won in this particular conflict. And it could also lead to questions soldiers have about why they are even fighting the conflict. We also addressed the technological advancements in the war, and now we look at some of the U.S. reasons for entering the conflict. So according to this information here, it's looking at meat exchange from South America and from the United States. So this is the ton of meat that has been sent, and who they're going to. So what we do see here is that the U.S. is trading meat, food supplies to the German enemy. And that is what is going to prompt Germany to try to block this area off to pretty much starve their enemies out. Loans from the United States. When we look at this one here, we see that the British have borrowed 4.2 million, France borrows 2.9, Italy is borrowing 1.6, it comes in later into this particular conflict. So we see once again, from the German point of view, they're looking at U.S. loans and U.S. trade as being problematic, that the U.S. is in fact not being neutral, that the United States is actually picking a side. Let's see, what else? I want you to think about this particular scenario here, and hopefully this will get you to think about why the Germans respond with unrestricted German submarine warfare. So we have two countries that are fighting. They have 1 million guns, and they are running out of guns and running out of bullets. In comes a third party trying to give this particular country, which is the enemy of this country here, weapons. So they have guns, which could possibly give them 1 million guns, and those 1 million guns could be used to kill the people here. This is primarily the situation that the U.S., the British, the French, and the Germans find themselves in this particular conflict, which is going to prompt Germany to issue their unrestricted German submarine warfare policy, or UGSW. From the German point of view, and this comes from a document dated 31 August 1916, Conference on Unrestricted German Submarine Warfare, and it talks about the amount of money that Germany believes the U.S. is trading, lending to the German enemy. Here you see a German soldier in this political cartoon that is daring the vessels to come out. He's threatening, I dare you to come out. And so on these ships, you see freedom of the seas, international laws, and national honor. Like, think about it from the American point of view. Does Germany own the seas? No, there's freedom of the seas. Is there any international law that says the United States, can trade with this and can't trade with that nation? No, international law. I mean, Germany doesn't write international law, so how dare Germany come up with a policy that is going to threaten U.S. interests in the particular region, even if they are fighting a conflict? So eventually, what's going to start happening is that Germany is going to start knocking out some of the U.S. ships. They're going to start sinking some of these. How do we know that? Well, because Wilson issues a message on this, and he sends this to the Germans, and he talks about the ships that were destroyed. He mentions right here the Falaba. He mentions a series of American vessels like the Gulf Flight by a German submarine. So here Wilson is saying to the Germans, listen, you have this policy of unrestricted German submarine warfare. This is being problematic to the U.S. cause. If you don't stop, this is going to be an issue that can be a no-no. From the German point of view, they're simply saying, well, you did claim that you were neutral, and you did claim that you were going to trade equally. So Germany is questioning Wilson's declaration of neutrality. In this particular image, we see trade. So this is foreign trade during World War I. Looking at the data from 1914 to 1916, this is U.S. trade going to the Allied Central and Northern neutrals. We can see clearly that the Central Powers, the side Germany is on, is not getting as much trade in comparison to the German enemy. That, to the Germans, is going to say that the Americans have picked a side and Wilson is violating his neutrality declaration. In comes the Lusitania, which is a ship that is usually used to, some might say a propaganda piece, but usually this is the reason that's given. If you look in a standard, high school textbook, what caused World War I, Lusitania sinking is probably going to come up. Whether or not they focus on the trade, I guess that's a different issue. What we do know is that prior to the Lusitania being destroyed, Germany issued a message to travelers, and you could see that in this particular document that is going to be published in American newspapers, and it's pretty much telling people possibly would want to board this vessel that if you board any vessel, that keep in mind there is a war going on, and if you board these vessels and those vessels go into the war zone, you are pretty much running the risk, because remember, Germany has the policy of UGSW. If you clicked on this link, it would take you to some animation from 1918 that looks at the sinking of the Lusitania. And just think about right now how you're doing with regard to this screencast. What are you doing? Are you taking notes? Are you staying focused, not focused? Maybe you're sleeping, maybe you're zoning out, whatever. British propaganda can be viewed as another cause. How much propaganda was coming in, information about the war, how much of it was one-sided. So there's an argument to be made that a lot of the U.S. Information about the war is one-sided, coming primarily from the British and French, which leaves the German interpretation out. Let's also keep in mind that eventually Russia is going to leave the war. They signed a treaty called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Why is this important? Well, just look at the sides fighting. We pretty much have Britain, France, and Russia fighting a war. That's three sides, and they're fighting Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. So it's a 3-3 fight. However, when Russia leaves, this knocks it down to 2-3. And keep in mind, the United States is probably at a point where their relationship with Germany is just not that great. So for anybody to kind of leave the conflict, it might put the other side in a position where they could easily defeat 2 as opposed to 3. Keep in mind the Zimmerman Note, which is the German attempt to create an alliance with Mexico to try to invade the United States from the south. So when you combine the Zimmerman Note, Russia leaving the war, British propaganda continuing, these are all things that are going to get the United States closer to declaring war. Zimmerman Note, here we see the text of the note. It says that Germany is going to begin UGSW and that they're trying to keep the U.S. neutral. However, in the event of this not succeeding, what not succeeding? U.S. staying neutral. They are going to make a proposal with Mexico to go to war together, make peace together. And this could be viewed as the final straw that Congress views as Germany is definitely problematic and the U.S. needs to enter the war. So think about the American causes. Maybe you want to pause this and kind of outline what you think they are. And you better have, let's say, Zimmerman Note, U.S. trade, UGSW, Lusitania, all of that stuff would count. Here we see an image of Wilson addressing the nation with regard to the decision to go to war. And here you see some excerpts from Wilson. talking about why he is going to go to war. Here he says that American ships have been sunk, and that's the reason why the U.S. is entering the conflict. Keep in mind, when the United States enters the war, this is going to require a big military. This is a guns and butter chart. And when you're thinking about guns and butter, it's an economic term. I always like to think if you have one tree, you can make either 50 pieces of paper, which is a social good, or you can make 50 spears to kill somebody. And when we look here, they're just using guns and butter. Guns are military goods. Butter is usually a social good, which is why I use the spear and I use paper. The point here is that when you are fighting war, you're probably moving down here and producing more guns than you were possibly producing social goods. And that could be beneficial for people of certain businesses that are making war-related items, which is why we see in this particular image, you're going to start to see U.S. businesses converting to making, machines for possibly vehicles to now machines that could possibly be used for tanks. So you're no longer making a car, now you're making a tank. How is the United States going to fund this war? They're going to fund this war by issuing Liberty bonds. Liberty bonds, look at it here. They're saying, if you want to help support the war and you can't fight the conflict, buy a Liberty bond. That's how the U.S. pays businesses to make war-related goods. How does that work? Well, you pay maybe $20 today, and in 7 years, that bond could be worth $40. So you double your money, but you can only obtain that $40 at the end of 7 years. So it's a way for the United States to raise money to fight this particular conflict. Eventually, the United States is going to pass the Sedition Act, which is going to address, how the U.S. is going to deal with people in the United States that are interfering with the war effort. So let's just say in this scenario, if you were trying to buy a Liberty bond and I was an anti-war individual like Mario Cui and I said, don't buy a Liberty bond, you would be standing in the way of the United States military to raise funds for the war effort. Anyway, those are issues that are really about the United States fighting the conflict. And that will be addressed in another screencast. Who will fight the war? Doughboy is code word World War I for an infantry soldier. They are the people fighting the conflict. And who will control the people at home? You don't want the people to act up and revolt like they did in Russia, which led to Russia pulling out of the conflict. Again, this will be addressed in a later screencast, as will some of the specifics with regard to a communist revolution. For today, all I really want you to focus on were simply why the United States entered World War I and what are the reasons and how do they differ from the European view. That's it.